Chinese culture is quite different from US culture, where most of our listeners are. So I wondered the way Jihan described Bitcoin in Mandarin, like it's a different language, but also a different culture. I wonder how that affects the way you explain Bitcoin.
I think it doesn't change. The message of Bitcoin, it might be translated in different languages, but everyone sees the value of Bitcoin, the founding values, which is its permissionless nature, its trustlessness, its uncensorable transaction capacity, the ability to give everyone in the world a right to transact. These are the things that attracted Jihan to it as well as anyone else. Yeah, this doesn't change over the language barrier. And that is why he saw the potential of Bitcoin, just like a lot of other people did outside China at that time. And he wanted to give it to other people. So he started this forum called 8btc.com. In Chinese, it's called BABTC, BA is for 8. So he started BABTC.com forum back then to have more discussions around Bitcoin and spread the word.
You and I care about censorship resistance. At least speaking in the United States, I don't think everyone cares about censorship resistance. But maybe it's one of those things until your bank account gets shut down or some type of payment censorship.
That's a very interesting point that you raise.
Yeah.
So in Asia, people even care even less about censorship resistance because, how privacy is something that people start caring about when they have all the basic necessities of life and they have all the avenues to meet their aspirations. Only then people start caring about privacy. I mean, I do think privacy is a basic human right. But of course, if I was to choose between having food to eat or privacy, of course, I will choose the former. And that's why people in Asia often do not care as much about privacy as people in the US do, even if people in the US do not care as much as you would like them to. Anyone who comes from the West to China or from anywhere, when they come to China, they are surprised by how cashless China is. People have only read about it or heard about it, but China is really, really cashless. I believe there were some stats like at least 70%. This was like 2 years ago that I read these stats, so it may be even more now. 70% of all transactions are cashless in China already. That's a huge deal. We cannot imagine that in the US or in India, such a cashless scenario. To give you a more concrete picture, there are these people who come on the weekend from the villages around Beijing to sell their produce, farm produce. And they just park their caravans and they sell the farm produce. These guys also have a WeChat QR code, and most of these guys are very old. And, of course, they are not educated and they probably cannot even read and write, but they do know how to use WeChat. And then there are shops that only accept WeChat or Alipay payments. So they only have the QR code. They do not accept cash. Companies in the West, because of the social political nature of USA and most Western economies, they are more outspoken and they are more they communicate more with the audiences. But in China, because of the social political nature of the country, the companies do not act in the same way. And so the audiences often mistake this as an intentional silence or as an intentional effort to be opaque or hide something, which is not true. It's just how things are here.
That's really interesting. So in the US, it's all about, let's say there was a bug in the software and the CEO gets on Twitter and says, hey, listen, we had this bug, we'll be updating it in 2 hours, or, the continual communication and transparency. But that's just different. That's the US style, or we'll say Western world style, but in Chinese culture, that's just not something that's done.
Yes. And the social political setup has a lot to do with it.
Gotcha. And you mentioned that. Are there any other misconceptions that the Western world you think has about Bitmain that are off because of the quite different cultural difference between the US and China?
Yeah. Another thing is I've noticed sometimes people think that Bitcoin Cash is less than Bitcoin in many ways just because it is a Chinese version of Bitcoin, which I don't agree with because it was first hard forked by a collective group of developers from Europe and not from China. And in the beginning, even if we go back long before Bitcoin Cash came into being, Big Block Camp was started in the US with businesses who were really suffering because of Bitcoin's congestion and backlog of transactions. So they flew to China to talk to miners. This is a very well-reported meeting by New York Times by a writer who has written a lot about cryptocurrencies, including the famous book called Digital Gold, Nathaniel Popper.
Right, Mr. Popper.
Yeah. I really respect his journalistic abilities. And that was a very well written article about that meeting. So this included Coinbase founder Brian Armstrong, included Circle, included BitPay, if I'm not mistaken, And I believe Roger was there as well. And these businesses, they flew to Beijing to talk to the miners and tell them how their businesses are suffering and the miners should put their foot down because they can't just keep making money and not care about the protocol or the entire ecosystem, and that their profits are tied to the long-term growth of the ecosystem. And these were the arguments they made. It was a well-covered meeting. I would recommend to all viewers to check it out. It was called The Civil War in Bitcoin or something, the headline in New York Times. It's easy to find it. Just Google Civil War, Bitcoin, New York Times.
It's a common sentiment among, I guess what I'll say is the uneducated Western world on crypto Twitter. But I guess there's a lot of things you could say about the crypto Twitter world in general. But like one of those is that Bitmain, they complain about Bitmain selling the chip and then using it to mine themselves and then shipping it like 6 or 9 months later. But I guess that's just not true.
There are many things I can say that will inform you that that's not possible in many ways. But the simplest way of putting it is Bitmain makes money, or Bitmain's cash cow is selling miners. And it wants its customers to be happy, so they come back for more for the next generation and they keep buying. So it's very essential that Bitmain not just sells the miner, but also a good mining experience to the customers. And if it's unfairly competing with their customers, that is counterproductive. That's a maybe a short-term strategy. If Bitmain was to, just decide, okay, we close shop tomorrow, then maybe that's a good thing to do. But Bitmain is not looking at doing that. They want to keep their cash cow flowing. And for that, it's very important that Bitmain sells a good mining experience to its buyers. My Bitmain days are long behind me when I am not obliged by any contracts. I would love to share more stories which would inspire even more people about what Jihan did and why he did the things he did. Things I can't say because of my employment obligation. I've learned a lot about seeing things before they happen. And I think it's because he's always listening to people. So even though he's a multi-billionaire because of, he still is very humble when it comes to making big decisions. So he will listen to the experts. He will listen to all sides of the story. And then he will form a decision based on what he heard from everyone, whether it's the Bitcoin Cash debate, or it's the so-called hash war, or it's protocol changes that miners need to vote on. He would just listen to all the different sides of the story. And then he would also spend a lot of time reading everything he can. He would get all the materials he can on that topic and then form an opinion. I think that's a very admirable quality.
This whole Hong Kong IPO thing, what exactly happened there? Is that still going to happen? Has it been called off? It's been just tough because there's been so many news and rumors that I don't really know exactly what to believe.
Yeah, that is true. We notice a lot of people still confused or asking this question, even though we've already informed the truth on our blog. So we informed that although we had applied, our application did not get approved for whatever reason. We don't know. And the regulators in Hong Kong are not obligated to inform us the reason. So, yeah, we don't know. But we will apply at an appropriate time in the future.
Gotcha. I appreciate the clarification. Of course, this is not going to surprise you, Nishant, but a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, this is really nonsensical argument, but because they own 1 million BCH, that for some reason had something to do with them not getting approved.
I don't think the regulators in Hong Kong would have would be so privy to the details of the debate between Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin. So my guess is that all these rumor mongers on Twitter are overinflating the Bitcoin Cash side of it. And even if the regulators did pay heed to it, it was still a small part of the evaluation that everyone was mentioning or the mainstream media was talking about. So I don't believe it had a big role to play in the regulators' decision to approve or not to approve.